Hi, everybody. This is Addison Shonland, and my guest today is John Heimlich, who is Chief Economist at Airlines for America. John, thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
My pleasure, Addison. Good to be with you.
So we're going to go through the same three issues that I go through with all the smart people in this industry that talk to me. Number one, the market reaction to COVID. When I talk about market, I mean commercial aviation market. It was very sudden. How is it that this contagion, this pandemic, snuck up on the airline industry and took it by such surprise?
Well, I think it took the whole global economy by surprise, and we were no exception. The degree to which this virus seems more contagious and more lethal than previous ones that we saw in the past 20 years, I think for all of society, not just the airlines, was clearly a factor. And then by default, the necessary stringency and scope of the measures to contain it. And they both had effects which on air travel and transport, and then collaterally on the strength of the economy. So all those things combined to really create the unprecedented in aviation history drop in demand, duration of the drop in demand, and extent of the cash crisis.
So there was clear shrinkage, really, and closure of air travel, and the effects we are seeing are devastating on a literally a global basis. There's nobody seems to be able to come out of this without bleeding extensively. What do you think what do we expect from this devastation downstream?
Well, I mean, first of all, the immediate things are a much smaller global airline industry, smaller in the number of flights, planes, people, smaller footprint for a while, I believe. Certainly in the near term, it to some extent flows in the face of the upgauging trends we had seen. So, I think some of the largest wide bodies, particularly international long haul, have lost some of their near-term appeal, certainly some of their value. So we're going to see accelerated aircraft retirements. And I think obviously we'll see a change in the experience, right? The frequency and degree to which we clean airports, aircraft, facilities, possibly procedures that passengers and employees go through to ensure personal safety and public health. And that's not my area of expertise, but there's a whole array of people looking at that. And I think the way people think about just proximity to one another is going to change some procedures, and will affect their confidence in terms of when they come back. Whether it's sitting close to one another in a sports stadium or on an airplane, people will think a little bit differently about their personal safety and their personal space. And we just have to be really honest that no one really knows how this will all sort out yet.
Yeah. I'm listening to you explain that, and I'm thinking about so much of our economic activity is dependent on the ability to fly somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, even I was thinking about this today. Some of my colleagues drive to the office when they commute. I take the subway, I take the metro. That's a different experience than those who drive. I will be standing or sitting in extreme proximity to multiple other human beings, as I did pre-pandemic. And, before you can even talk about going to the airport and getting on a plane, you have to talk about, can I go to work? Can I get to the airport? Can I be in a tram going from one concourse to another? It's not just about inside the plane. But look, absolutely, just in this, just U.S. passenger and cargo airlines employ 750,000 people across the globe, actually 754,000 in February. And the vast majority, well over 90%, are in the United States. Um, there's 10 million some U.S. jobs tied to commercial aviation in the direct supply chain and elsewhere. So there's no question that this is, it's profoundly part of the global economy. And in fact, I think you can see that, just because there wasn't enough remaining airlift to move cargo, including masks and medical equipment and pharmaceuticals and food, that some of the passenger carriers have converted to freighter-only operations, for some carriers for the first time since the 40s and 50s. So that's another way in which we're vital to the economy, not just in terms of transport of people, but transport of goods.
It's truly, it's eye-popping, the numbers, eye-popping. So, of course, we're in the midst of this darkness and we're all looking for light. A turnaround eventually comes. Do you have any thoughts about how long this takes, and what are the signals, what are the flags that you will be looking for that signal the, I guess, the swing back to not to normal, but away from the bottom?
Yeah. Well, after 9/11, it took 3 to 4 years for a full recovery. After the global financial crisis and oil spike, it took closer to 7 years, 7.5 for recovery. And people forget that. I think this is going to be several years, and there'll be different, measures of recovery, the number of people flying, the amount of cargo, the operating revenues. But I think we're in for a while. But as far as any signs of, positive inflection in the coming months, year, clearly putting, well, from a demand perspective, we're still burning through a lot of refunds. So when we can get to a stage where sales for travel are exceeding refunds for canceled travel, that will be an excellent turning point. I think other things we can look for in a more public fashion are when airlines put points back on the route map to which they've suspended service, when they just generally announced additions of capacity. That could be in the form of frequencies in a given market, dots connected on the map. But obviously when they put more, when they're flying more, they're doing it for a reason, and they'll be responding to signs of demand. So that's what I think is going to be the most obvious thing we can point to. Right now we have TSA publishing daily stats on its website of the number of travelers going through checkpoints. And we have fallen below 100,000 for the past few weeks per day, US and foreign flag travelers. This time of the year, a year ago, we would have seen about 2.3 million
per day.
So yes, so that's a reduction of 96%. So that's another thing we can look for as long as TSA keeps putting out those numbers. If we're below 100,000 per day now, let's see if we can get back up to 500,000 and that'll, then go from there.
John, if you were to, I guess, crystal ball, look in your crystal ball, when do you think is the earliest we can expect an uptick?
Earliest, I would guess, any kind of uptick. I wouldn't expect much before August or September at this point. And September has its own seasonality because schools are presumably back in session. That's another wild card. And that extends to colleges and universities, not just K through 12. I think corporate travel budgets will be cut and suppressed for a while for a combination of, financial reasons, as well as companies hesitant to require their employees to travel until there's more certainty about the epidemiology of COVID-19. Robert Redfield, the CDC director, did an interview with the Washington Post yesterday and was quoted as saying there likely to be a second wave in the fall and winter. Could be even worse than the wave we're going through now, and it will be combined with the normal flu season. So I think that gives people a lot of pause about booking something now for fall or winter.
Right.
Until there's more certainty about a medical solution, a vaccine, assurances of some sort of distance within an airplane. So there's just a lot to consider. But if we don't see much uptick by August or September, I think we could be in for a long fall and winter.
Last question for you. Do you think that the government support for the industry is going to be sufficient if the scenario you're talking about here? September's not that far away. We will probably run out of money.
Well, so it's sufficient, and then the question is for what purpose? So I think it's sufficient to keep everyone in business. I do, through September 30th. Without it, we would have had some big questions. But I don't see any, large carriers. We've had a few small ones not survive. But I think anyone of any meaningful brand recognition, it's enough to survive the near term. But it won't preclude the need for very large cuts to the size of the fleet and the size, or expense, I should say, of the workforce come the fall. The other thing is it's not sufficient to perhaps weather a lengthy, severe global recession, which may or may not happen. The CARES Act relief was really meant for immediate payroll assistance with the conditions that you could not do any involuntary furloughs or pay reductions. And then the loan program is kind of a backstop, and that's another point, which if you get the loan, depending on what the conditions are, you'll be saddled with debt for quite some time, which I think will limit the carrier's ability to invest and add capacity at some point. So it's sufficient for survival purposes, but may not be sufficient beyond that. Our projection is that the hit to our liquidity would easily exceed the total grants and loans combined.
Wow, it's quite a shocking situation. Thanks so much for your time, John. Appreciate it very much.
It was a pleasure, Addison. Thanks for the great question.